So we've been covering the gap between the kind of mealy-mouthed platitudes of politicians who recognize their actual views on reproductive rights are totally unpopular and who basically want to trick people, the gap between what they say and what they do. In fact, the Speaker of the House, Republican Mike Johnson, said just yesterday he supports IVF.
Look, I believe in the sanctity of every human life, always have. And because of that, I support IVF and its availability. It needs to be readily available. It needs to be something that every American supports, and it needs to be handled in an ethical manner. So we'll continue to support that.
Okay, it needs to be handled in an ethical manner. That's the key part there, right? I believe in IVF, needs to be readily available, but ethical matter, what's he mean by that? So that's what he stood at the podium and said. Well, crucially, if you want to know what that ethical matter he's referring to is, he remains a co-sponsor of the Life at Conception bill, which would codify personhood at the moment of fertilization and full 14th Amendment due process rights for frozen embryos with absolutely no carve-out for IVF. A reminder to watch what they do, not what they say. Today, we have more evidence of that. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina introduced a non-binding resolution that does nothing except, quote, express support for continued access to fertility care like IVF. And even this pathetically toothless resolution gets only 6 Republican co-sponsors. But get this. Yesterday, 145 Republicans in Congress file an amicus brief asking the Supreme Court to restrict access to the abortion drug mifepristone. And in asking the court to ban the mailing of abortion pills anywhere in the U.S., they cite the Comstock Act. That's a basically dead law from the 1870s, named after an infamous misogynistic anti-vice crusader that banned the mailing of obscene materials or anything, quote, intended for the prevention of contraception or procuring of abortion. Mind you, more than half of all abortions in the U.S. were medication abortions in 2020. Mifepristone is the drug commonly used in that procedure. A right-wing anti-abortion district judge in Texas already tried to ban mifepristone nationwide. And just a few weeks, the Supreme Court will actually hear that case that started with him. And so those 145 Republicans in Congress are affirmatively choosing to sign an amicus brief. They don't have to. They are just announcing to you their real intentions. Congresswoman Katie Porter is a Democrat of California. She's a member of the pro-choice caucus. She's a candidate for the Senate in 2024, and she joins me now. I'm curious as a member of Congress what you make. I was cracking up the Nancy Mace thing, and here's why I was cracking up at it. It does seem like an easy slam dunk. Like they know they have a problem. This wild Alabama State Supreme Court decision, which imperiled IVF in that state, the co-sponsorship of the Life at Conception, Act. Like, why wouldn't they rush to do that?
Well, I mean, look, this entire thing is about Nancy Mace being performative, about the Republican Party trying to convince people and lull them into thinking that they will not come for every last bit of women's freedom to make their own decisions about their health and about when and if to start a family. Look, people said Roe would never fall. It fell. Now they're saying, well, they never attack things like IVF. Well, they never attack birth control. Wake up, America. Everyone who is a woman or knows and loves a woman and believes in freedom ought to be up in arms about this. And the only solution here is vote them out.
Do you think if the results of the 2024 election were that the Republicans took majorities in both houses of Congress and elected Donald Trump to be the president, is there any doubt in your mind whether they would sign a national abortion ban?
No. You know why? Because they've said they will do exactly that. As you point out, they are relying, the Republicans, 145 of them, 90% of whom are men, who signed that amicus brief, are relying on the Comstock Act. What does that apply to? It applies to the prevention of contraception. The prevention of pregnancy, the prevention of conception. That means it applies to birth control, to contraception. So this is the beginning. And if we don't act, it will be the end. So I think we have to quit mincing words and quit trying to reassure Americans. Our rights are under attack and we need to fight like hell. I
wonder how you think that people hear that in the state of California, because one of the things that has happened post-Dobbs is that, you know, the bifurcation of the states, right? It was quote unquote, returned to the states. And that means that some states have outlawed abortion. Some states have actually secured abortion rights, have reaffirmed them, right? Actually put them into statutory protections. But for people in a state like California, do you think voters are aware that those state protections are going to be superseded by national legislation if these people who want to ban abortion manage to win power?
Californians definitely feel safe. They feel like they can make their own choices here, and we have leadership in our state that has reassured them of that. But the reality is this is just simple fifth grade civics class. The federal government has the ability to make laws that are supreme to state law. So when Trump says there will be a nationwide abortion ban, there won't be one thing a single lawmaker in California can do about it.
Do you think this issue, in your conversation, both in your campaigning in California for the soon-to-be open Senate seat, and also in the context of traveling the state and thinking about this 2024 election, I think some people misapprehend how salient the issue is. My sense is that it's every bit as salient as the day Dobbs came out, and even more so. Do you get that sense from the voters that you talk to, or do you think people have sort of been lulled in some false sense of security in a state like California?
Well, it's very, very important to people to have the freedom to make this decision for themselves. That, I think, is as strong and as urgent, and people feel really strongly about it. And each time we've actually seen this issue be put cleanly on the ballot for an up-down vote, Americans across the country have said they want their own rights to make their own decisions. The problem has been that we're not making it clear to voters that this is on the ballot in every single federal election, in every part and pocket of this country. It's on the ballot in California. And, you know, in the Senate race, we have had colleagues, I've had Democratic colleagues say things like, you know, the decision to reverse Roe, it's a sign of things to come. It's not a sign of anything. It is actually resulting in women and girls dying right now. And so I think that reflects the lack of urgency, that kind of language. This is a harbinger of what's to come. This is part of the gradual erosion of our democracy. It is about people not having freedom today. It is about our daughters having less freedom than we had. And so I think there needs to be more urgency on this from elected leaders across the country, including here in California.